Hello and welcome back to Let There Be Light. I first want to thank you all so much just for being here today, for listening. I know you have a lot of options of things to choose to listen to, so the fact that you decided to turn on this podcast and listen to this conversation means a lot. We've had a fun start to 2026 with Sister Kateri Rose helping us understand hope and being able to make small changes every single day in the new year. And then of course, how can we forget about John O'Leary? I mean, I'm not even kidding. I think every single day I'll have a moment where I'll be like, oh, why me? And then I hear his voice saying, why me? And it just shifts everything. So it has certainly been an exciting start. If you've been enjoying the show, I ask that you follow the podcast, whether on Spotify or Apple. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe. That certainly helps. And as always, pass it along, share it with your friends and family, whoever you think might enjoy some of these messages. I know with every single episode, I'm taking something away that I'm being able to put into practice, which has really been a gift for my own faith life. So I just pray that you're able to experience the same. Now, today's guest is really a pivot of some of the different topics that we've had for 2026. We're actually going a little bit more into looking at the church as an institution. So I'm going to introduce today's guest, of course, as always, with their official bio. Today's guest is Colleen Dulle. Colleen is a Vatican correspondent at America Magazine and host of the podcast Inside the Vatican. She was a ABC News contributor for the 2025 conclave and has commented on Vatican News for the BBC, CBC, and MSNBC, among others. She currently lives in New Orleans, Louisiana, with her husband, son, and dog. And most recently, Colleen is the author of Struck Down, Not Destroyed. And I'm really glad we're having this conversation with Colleen, and I'm really also grateful that she wrote this book, because a lot of times, as someone who is very obviously openly Catholic, I do get a lot of questions or comments about the politics of the Catholic Church. So not so much the faith, but also looking at the church as an institution, and certainly some of the brokenness and the wounds that have come from it. And I know we had an episode last year with Father Hollow, which if you haven't listened, I really encourage you to. It's an incredible story where he was suffering from a tumor and really offering it up to victims of church abuse. And then he ends up having an incredible, miraculous healing. And I appreciated that episode so much, because it really was acknowledging to people that, yeah, there are wounds, and there are wounds within the church, and there are things that go wrong. And so Colleen really sees that firsthand, in really a difficult spot sometimes as a Vatican reporter, having to cover not only just the politics of it, but of course those scandals, those investigations, and she details all of them in her book. And what I love the most, though, is she really shows how God still cuts through the darkness, that the faith, she's able to keep the faith because she's still able to see God's goodness through it all. There is brokenness in all of humanity, including, of course, the institution. And I hope that her strength and her continued faith and continuing to show up and pray with God and wrestle with God, I hope that inspires some of you, perhaps, if there is something that has happened or something that you're working through, to continue to show up to God. Because again, at the center of all these stories, God's light cuts through the darkness. And that's what this podcast is all about. It's about finding beauty in the broken. And so this really is one of those episodes where we look at the brokenness of the church and have a really honest conversation about it. But God is so good. And he has left so many beautiful graces through the sacraments and through the church. And there are so many good people in this church that are continue to inspire and evangelize and save lives. So I really hope that even by the end of it, that message is clear, that faith is a gift, and it's something that we can pray for, and that we have to keep praying for, and praying just for that trust, and trusting that we'll see God's goodness in everything. Okay, well, that was a long spiel. But I hope you enjoyed this episode. The book details, her podcast details will be in the show notes, but her book you could buy wherever you get books. So, Struck Down, Not Destroyed, Keeping the Faith as a Vatican Reporter. I hope you enjoy Colleen Dulle.
I'm Mary Coltwriter. Welcome to Let There Be Light. Finding beauty in the broken starts right now. First, Colleen, I just want to say you're in New Orleans, but you're moving to Italy. Last time we spoke, it was in the fall, and you were like, it's pretty crazy trying to get, a visa, get over there. Is it still crazy?
Indeed.
Okay.
Yes. In fact, I'm like further into the craziness now.
Oh,
So
good.
I have overcome some of the steps. I now have an Italian tax number, as does my husband and 3-year-old son.
Amazing.
But now we're just into like whole other parts of the visa process.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, what an experience. I know when we had spoken, you had said like that's something you always knew you wanted to do. But do you just like being in Italy? Like, do you like the actual culture? Do you like pizza?
I mean, the food I always joke is like my favorite part of the job.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I'm not particularly attached to like Rome itself, except
Right.
that it like has my work in it. It is a big city, much like other big cities that I have lived in or visited. So that's not a draw for me. But like, yeah, the ability to like be at the ocean so quickly, or maybe go to the mountains, or, go up to Tuscany and have really good wine for not that much money sounds really, really
Right.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, like do you think you'll have a little like European escape? Like you guys could go away for the weekend?
I think we'll look forward to like exploring a lot. My
Right.
husband is a Latinist. He has a degree in medieval history and then also like teaches classics. So I'm sure that he can take me on some like really good tours of all the ruins and such.
Wow, that is really impressive. I feel like that's a really good person to
Yeah.
go to Europe.
Yeah. No, we did Greece together for a honeymoon and it
Yeah.
was very history loaded. But by
Yeah.
the end of it, we were kind of like, okay, that was a lot of rocks on hills.
Yeah. That's amazing. So I studied abroad, but when I was abroad, I actually didn't go to Italy because I was like, well, there's just so much to cover in Italy, and I didn't feel like
True.
I could do it in a weekend. But when I was 13, I went to Rome,
Oh my God.
and all I remember really was the pizza was a sandwich.
Yes. Yeah.
And I remember I bought a really cool like leather jacket. So,
Oh yeah.
and then I remember the restaurants, the people outside the restaurants are like, come on, they're trying to sell you to get you to
Yeah.
come in. But nowadays people are saying to me like, oh, Rome is just like a big city. Like, it's kind of like a big, like that vibe is what you were saying. And I'm like, I got to go back there. I got to see how I remember it.
Well, now you'll have somebody to visit.
Yeah,
So
exactly. Perfect. I'll know someone. That's huge. Very exciting. Okay, well, I am particularly looking forward to chatting about your book because when I was reading it, I was like, wow, this is a very hard job. Like, yes. And I know.
yeah. Yeah.
Yes. It's a hard job. I started in TV in news reporting. And I would always say to people, like, I just like God gives you the graces to grow through what he wants you to go through. And like for me personally, news reporting was really heavy and it was really
hmm
difficult. And I just didn't have those graces. But I always say, like, I'm like, but I applaud the people who do and who can. And it's so important. And it's really important that we, even at the local level, have really good news reporters. So to see this as a Vatican reporting, I was like, wow, this is actually even more difficult in some ways because you're so connected to the subject.
Yeah. It's more difficult in some ways, but I think maybe less so in others. Like I
Yeah.
did some, gnarly local news reporting when I was in college in New Orleans and, saw some like pretty ugly stuff. And
Right.
certainly that's like those are not things that I have to deal with now. Crime stories. I mean, crime stories, yes, but not like deaths and
Right.
whatever. Overdoses were like a story that came up a lot back then. And so Yeah, like I feel lucky that I don't have to see those things anymore and don't have to like have eyes on them and cover them because that really did a number on me.
Yes.
Um, but in a totally different way. Yeah, when you're covering scandals that are rocking like your faith institution, your faith community, that does do something to, well, your faith.
Yeah, yeah, completely. So why was it? I mean, in the book, you kind of explain your story. You've always been very interested. You've always been very curious, it seems,
Yeah.
which is a good quality. What was it that drew you to Vatican reporting? Was this something that you always envisioned for yourself?
I talk a little in the book's intro about how when I was at Viz for high school, do you have mostly a St. Louis audience for this? Will they know what Viz is?
Yes, yes, they'll
Okay,
know. The people
perfect.
know. If not, they're
Yeah,
probably from like Indiana or somewhere in the
okay,
Midwest. They
vibes.
get
Well, it's
it.
Catholic girls' high school.
Right.
Um, yeah, when I was there, my best friend remembers me saying to her, and I don't remember this, so this is
Yeah.
clearly, hearsay from her, but she says that I told her I thought I might make a good Vatican reporter.
Mm,
And the reason why was that it was like the Benedict papacy era, and we were all hitting that age where we started to get curious about our own faith, about these things we had taught for our whole lives. And once we started exploring that, we were like teenagers with access to the internet. A lot of the stuff that came up for me in my like research about Catholicism was this really kind of brainy insider stuff. I liked to dig into that, but what I found I really liked was being able to then go back to school the next day and be talking to my friends, and we were talking about these things that were challenging us or whatever about, or challenging the beliefs we've been raised with. And I
yeah.
loved being able to communicate back what I had learned, not
Mm,
in like an argumentative way or whatever, but just in like you know I liked the exercise of getting to understand something well enough in my own head that I could then repeat it back and like explain it in an accessible way and kind of logic through it myself too.
right.
Um, yeah, so it was kind of the love of like digging into a complex institution that people were always wondering about, and being able to talk about it kind of clearly and accurately and accessibly that really
Yeah.
drew me.
And I don't want to jump to sort of what I have for the end of the conversation about how you have continued faith. But what I love is, I went to Catholic schools growing up. And it wasn't until now, and I had a wonderful Catholic upbringing, and you hear a lot of people that have been wounded from the church.
Hmm.
And it really wasn't until I was older that people are wounded from the church or they're really concerned with the church. And I think I kind of did grow up in a little bit of that bubble where I
Mm.
wasn't really so much exposed to that. And so now when I'm talking with people, and I've even interviewed a priest who is has gone viral for suffering, for victims of church abuse, and hearing him say like we have to put the fire out in our own building, and it's kind of really shifted my perspective on not whitewashing things. So I would love to hear you talk about not only, yes, what you do is difficult, but also it's important.
Mm. No, I really believe it's important. You know, my entry into this world was like a little rough because shortly after I graduated from journalism school, I did a 1 year fellowship at the magazine where I work now, America Magazine, which is run by the Jesuits. And they hired me full time after that 1 year. And like right as I got hired was this whole wave of like really dramatic sex abuse revelations. So all in the course of literally 1 month, August 2018, you had these revelations about Cardinal McCarrick, who is no longer a cardinal, who was removed for sex abuse. Then you had the Pennsylvania grand jury report, which was like pages on pages of details about 70 years of abuse. And then after that, you had this kind of effort by Archbishop Vigano, who was using the abuse crisis kind of wave, the revelations about McCarrick, to kind of get back at Pope Francis for something that he had been mad at him about and trying to implicate him in abuse. And the Vatican spent 2 years responding to that. But at the time, it was like, oh my God, did Pope Francis know about the abuse and cover it up? So
Right.
all of this is happening like the second I start as a full time, employee of the church, representative of the church, and journalist. So we're checking out the stories, but I was grappling with like, what does it mean to be part of this? But I mean, to get back to the importance of that reporting, like there was this refrain that me and a lot of the other young reporters who were my support system back then were saying to each other, which was like, the church is never going to heal from these things until it can fully acknowledge and accept the truth of what happened. And we saw our job as being able to, like, it being necessary for us to raise that truth, to make it visible because it was becoming increasingly clear that without orders from district attorneys or whatever, it was not going to come out.
Yeah.
State
And
attorneys general. Yeah.
well, and how was the process of, and this is something that really just came when you were saying that, when you're kind of digging this up, what is that process like to investigate something, to go through all of these reports? And is it something, information that given up freely? Is it something that you're kind of constantly having to knock on doors for?
Well, so back then, what was happening was you would get people making claims, right? So,
Mhm.
for example, the Vigano story, right? He made all these claims about restrictions that he said had been placed on McCarrick that were then not followed, and he was trying to argue that Pope Francis had not enforced them.
Yeah.
So we had to go back through Vigano's own schedule back then, through the events that McCarrick was involved in, and see, well, how were these things applied, these so-called restrictions? And what we found out was that Vigano's own calendar contradicted them. If McCarrick was banned from saying mass publicly, well, then why in that same time period did we have photos and videos and documentation of McCarrick and Vigano saying mass together? Right. So
Mm,
it was a lot of stuff like that.
wow.
I think what happens more often, for people who are reporting on abuse and in a lot more depth than I usually do now too, right? Because these days I'm very like Vatican focused, but
Yeah.
is a lot of times you'll hear from a survivor or an alleged survivor, and they'll come to you with a story, and you'll have to see what you can dig up. I don't have a lot of investigative training. So a lot of times I will ask them, I'll put them in touch with one of my colleagues who is a lot more gifted in investigative reporting or who works for a publication who has the resources for that. So
Mhm.
there's some like really trusted journalists at the Associated Press who I've referred a lot of people to. There's some people at other Catholic news organizations that I've sent people to because my magazine is actually not like we're not known for investigative reporting. So if it's something that I'm gonna have to like really be pulling a lot of like data files for, chasing people down, trying to get dioceses to talk, for example, that's just not something that's like possible for us as an organization because we have so much
Right.
else that we prioritize.
Right.
So I'll always make sure to connect them with somebody who's able to do that because for right now, that's not my area. Yeah.
Well, it's just so interesting. There's just so many things that were mentioned that I was like, man, I had no idea. I had no idea. Like even just the processes of everything. And I mean, obviously I knew things are politics involved, but I grew up being told that priests are human too. And
Yeah,
that,
yeah, for sure.
there's flaws and humans have flaws and there's evil, especially, yeah, the devil wants to take down the church, and right now it's kind of how it works. And so I always had that, but I learned a lot. Okay, so I want to
Mm.
first start with you mentioned it. The sex abuse scandals come out, and automatically you kind of start the book out with, just so people know, each chapter goes through a different sort of scandal that you covered.
Hmm.
And I liked that you talk about how you're wrestling with God. And I want to know how sort of that changed your prayer life. And I would love for you to also tell the story, if you don't mind spoiling it for the people. But I think it's a great Easter egg of the fun to come. But at the tomb, when you visited
Oh, sure.
the tomb, I think that's a beautiful testimony.
Gosh, okay. Lots
I
in that
know.
question. Let me see
There
if I
was a
can
lot of the
remember all of
question.
it
I
to
was like,
answer.
my questions were arrows.
That's it. Okay. Um, Yeah, where to start? Wrestling with God. So I guess I'll step back a little bit and frame this since it's where we're going. But basically, shortly after that whole 2018 like summer of shame, they called it, or summer of scandal, um, I was having a tough time with my faith, and but I was still working and still trying to like live my life as a Catholic. And so with that work and also just like trying to take care of myself spiritually, it just so happened that my schedule fell together so that in February 2019 I would be going directly from a like 4 or 5 day silent retreat, Jesuit retreat in Montreal, directly to Rome to cover this summit that Pope Francis had called all the heads of the world's bishops' conferences to on sex abuse. And then going straight from there to the Holy Land, to Israel and Palestine, to work on my magazine's like guided pilgrimage there.
Wow.
And I was
A
like,
lot.
this is going to be so intense spiritually, and
Right.
just like walking straight into, my Jesuit spiritual director called it the belly of the beast in
Mm.
Rome. I was like, I'm either going into this thing or coming out of this thing an atheist or with some kind of new resolve to keep going in all this.
Right.
Um, yeah, so when I got on that Jesuit retreat in Montreal, one of the first prayers that my spiritual director gave me to sit with, because Ignatian prayer, like you're reading a gospel passage or a Bible passage, and then you're imagining yourself in it. Like you're really supposed to enter it into it with all your senses. And um, one of the first ones he handed me was Jacob wrestling with the angel. And I mean, I'm a Catholic. I don't read the Bible that much, but in that case, the stereotype is true. Um, so, I had never paid a lot of attention to the details of this story. But of course, when you're sitting there with it for an hour, just trying to
Yeah.
dig and dig and dig into what the people in the story are experiencing and maybe putting yourself into it, um, I realized, this experience for Jacob had to be so frustrating.
Right.
He's he's wrestling with this guy who just showed up. He doesn't know it's an angel or God or anything. It's just this guy who shows up and starts fighting him. And then they keep fighting. They're evenly matched. It says that they're evenly matched, and so no one's winning, and so they fight all night. And at some
Mm.
point he like hurts his hip or something, but he has to keep going. And finally at dawn, so after this like very nitty-gritty wrestling all night, the man reveals, or Jacob realizes that it was God or it was an angel, and the guy blesses him and changes his name. Always a very important moment in the Bible when somebody's name is changed, right? It's a
Right.
big personal transformation. Um, and as I sat with it, I kind of realized, like, one, how frustrating that was, but two, like, if God's purpose in that story was just to beat Jacob and change his name and give him his blessing, he didn't have to go all night, right? He didn't have to be
Right.
evenly, perfectly matched with this guy,
Yeah.
but he chose to. And what that said to me was that wrestling with God is really, it has inherent value. It's something that God wants us to do. And it's something that in that moment I felt like, okay, God is calling me to engage in this wrestling. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean I'm a bad Catholic or that my faith is too weak or something. I think on the contrary, like people in the Bible yell at God all the time. you
Yeah.
know,
No, for
they're arguing
sure.
with God all the time, right? There's the one
Yeah.
story where somebody's kind of walking him down. Oh, if there are two good people left in this city, will you destroy it? Right? People
Right.
bargain with God.
Yeah.
And I think it gave me permission to do that. And I think it also like made me understand that wrestling was gonna be part of my spiritual life, and that's okay. And so very much was for like many years. It still is today now, but I think less frequently than it was back in like that 2018, 2019, when it was such a tough time and my faith was constantly just being shaken by the things I was reporting on. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's what I love about that story is that's something that anyone can take away. No matter what you're going through, there's so often things we don't understand. And I used to always, I have a priest here and he always says, you know what? You could be mad at God just as long as you keep coming back.
For sure. For sure.
And it's like, and I love that I stay true to that. So then are now, you now are on the third trip of your
Yes.
three trips, right?
Didn't go home in between either. Like the stuff I packed was psychotic to go from,
That's crazy.
winter in Canada to like dawning of spring in Israel.
Right, right. So you now have this moment, and I think it's such a beautiful moment, especially in the timeline just of your career. This would it happened kind of early on in your time?
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
certainly.
which I like because I feel like you really can hold on to this.
Hmm. So yeah, so I go to Rome. It's the Abuse Summit. It was kind of difficult to cover because there were few like immediate results, right?
Yeah,
So I came out of it feeling pretty discouraged, honestly.
yeah.
Frustrated with like the lack of immediate results, although I had kind of known too that was what we could expect, that there weren't going to be a lot of changes right away. And then I get to the Holy Land and you know, we're going through these places. My job on this pilgrimage was basically just to like wrangle pilgrims. Not that
I
our
love that.
beloved pilgrims are people to be wrangled, but
Right.
you'd have to like make sure everybody had made it onto the bus. Okay, let's do the
Yes.
counts. Let's,
Yes.
whatever.
You said you were one of the younger people.
I was one of the younger people, so that meant a lot of like helping people over cobblestones, but also like to a certain extent promoting our work at America and
Right.
explaining here's how you download our podcast, that kind of thing. So it all felt very worky, right? It
Yeah.
did not feel like a spiritual experience. It would have been, I think, very easy to forget throughout that experience that I was like walking where Jesus walked,
Right.
and it would poke through sometimes, but I was really not having any like strong experiences of that or
Mm,
feelings of that. Um, it was just kind of matter of fact.
yeah.
And so, we spend half the week in Galilee, going around the Sea of Galilee and all the cities in the north where Jesus did his preaching. And then you make your way down through the West Bank, past Jericho, and then you go to Jerusalem. And then the last like 3 days are in Jerusalem. So that's like walking the stations of the cross, right? That's the site of the burial. It's also the site of the resurrection. It's amazing. It's insane. And so one of the last places that we were stopping was the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which includes the tomb where Jesus was buried, has like a small church over it. And then also that is it also includes the crucifixion site, but I actually didn't go up there.
Mm,
Um, but that tomb is also the site of the resurrection. So I wait my turn to get in there. And again, I really have not been having like any spiritual experiences, but I'm like, okay, like if something's gonna happen, maybe this will be the place. And it's crazy. They shuffle you through the tomb so fast because like really three people can stand by it at a time and it's in a tiny room. So you gotta keep it moving. But
right.
yeah, so I shuffle in there and I put my hands down and I put my head down and I'm just like, okay, God, like hey, I'm here. Like, what do you want to say to
I'm
me?
really tired.
Yeah, like truly, like it was a feeling of like collapse,
Yeah.
and I just felt like this like energy or something, from this stone that covered the tomb,
Mm,
and heard just like very clearly in my mind, this is your only hope.
mm,
And as I like stood up and walked out, it was immediately clear to me what it meant because I had had these two quotes floating in my head that my spiritual director had handed me on that retreat. And they said something to the effect of, to understand the message of the gospel, you don't need any fancy degrees, right? You don't need some kind of expertise. What you need is a heart stripped of trust in all things human, which,
mm.
girl, if that was not me after a year of covering the
Right.
abuse crisis, a heart stripped of trust in all things human and bowed down in adoration.
Mm,
And she says, it's from this French writer, Madeleine Delbrel, who I love. She says, and you have to hold on to this little book of the gospel with the understanding that it is your only hope.
wow.
And So I'm there and I'm hearing very clearly, like, this is your only hope. And it's starting to click
Yeah.
that the whole reason for all of this, this whole institution existing, even if it is like so messy and so angering to me so much of the time, is it's the resurrection. It's like the love of God. And, right after that, I talk about when you say mass, when you have mass in the Holy Land, you don't use the readings of the day. You use the readings that happen in that place. And so we're on this retreat, and James Martin, who's a big spiritual author, he was leading the retreat because we worked together. And I just remember him right after that at mass reading the gospel where Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene at the resurrection. She thinks it's the gardener. And then he says to her, Mariam. And she's like, you recognize when someone says your voice, right?
Right.
And she says, Rabboni. And me and Jim both just like immediately started crying then because it was so like real to me in that moment, the love that they had for each other, and like that was what was driving Jesus to appear to her, to go through hell and back, through
Right.
death,
Right.
to come back and communicate that love, and obviously what that then means for all of us who are like saved right alongside her.
Yeah.
Um so yeah, that really I think got me to hold on to the gospel with a lot of hope. Like
Mm.
after that, I think I had a much greater appreciation and went back to the gospels more to get back to the fundamentals of
Mm.
Christianity, of my faith, and that became something that I could hold on to no matter how much the institution disappointed me.
Yeah. I mean, praise God, because it's kind of like what we were reflecting on in the beginning is like it's important work, you know? And so
Yeah.
to have that hope, to stick with it because like we need people to do this work.
No,
You
for
know?
sure. Yeah.
We really,
Yeah, and
really
and
do.
and the spiritual work is just as hard and just as important, right?
Yeah.
I yeah, like no disrespect to any of my colleagues who have been on this journey, but like I know plenty of people who covering these things up close has made them lose their faith.
Mm,
And I'm aware that that could very easily be me. And
right.
and I'm fighting for it. Like I'm fighting for my faith day in and day out. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's so that I think is like an equally important part of my work, at least at this
Mm.
point. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. It kind of, well, I mean, for one thing, actually, I'm going to have to start shifting my prayers. You know how they always say to pray for the Pope? The Pope needs your prayers. I'm going to pray for everyone in the Vatican.
Hmm. Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
reporter, everyone that's a part of this business.
Extend your prayers to the Holy See Press office, the offices all around.
Right, right.
Yep.
We're gonna have to expand this rosary. Um, okay, I wanna touch on this because you've referenced a spiritual director a few times.
Hmm.
And I'm curious how you're able to find trust because you reference in one chapter a little bit of the dangers of clericalism,
Hmm.
putting people on pedestals. And so I'd love to hear now how you're navigating that in your own faith life.
Well, that's interesting. I think it's that I just have my people who I've worked with for so long and who I know
Yeah.
really well at this point. It's harder for me to put my trust in anyone, and I think that
Right.
it's probably wise that I don't blindly trust anyone, even if it has given me a little bit more of like a wall or some barriers when I'm interacting with certain people. Um, so I think, yeah, the people that I turn to for spiritual advice these days are the people that I have just known a very long time and who are like tried and tested and true.
Yeah.
Also, I think that there is an element of like I do trust my own discernment. Like Pope Francis used to say, we we form consciences, we don't replace them, right? And so I try to, yeah, use my discernment, use all of this, especially like Ignatian formation that I've had to say, okay, here's when I recognize like the spirit working in someone or in something that someone says, and here's where I don't. Here's when I think it's giving me the signs of, this is not the good spirit.
Right.
Um, and that like no one person is also communicating only the good spirit all of the time either, right? So I think covering a lot of these stories has made me understand the complexity of our humanity a lot more. You can have the exact same person doing like really amazing, beautiful, holy things and really, really awful, manipulative, evil things. And I think one of the things I've learned is like, yeah, not to see people as good or evil, but to see actions as good or evil,
Oh,
because we are all created inherently good. And I really
mm,
do believe that.
yeah.
So that's a little bit of my approach, but I don't know that I exactly answered your question there.
No, you did. You did. And especially because you said people, which I think is big too, because I found that a lot of times when I'm seeking counsel, they'll give advice, but they also like encourage me to talk to this person or,
Mm,
connect with this person. And I think that's a big part of it too, is because like discernment, it takes a lot of different considerations. But of course, first
hmm.
and foremost, as you mentioned, your own consciousness. Now,
And
I did not.
prayer, and prayer
And
for sure.
prayer, exactly. Prayers
Yeah.
first, everyone.
No, like I mean, truly, like everything
Yes.
has to be grounded in it, and when you're not grounded in it, that's
Right.
when things start going haywire. At least for me.
Right. No, no, no. Amen to that. Yeah, you and me both. Um, I wanted to have you mention a little bit about the story. I'm not going to know how to say his name. Jean.
Champagne.
Yeah, I would love for you to kind of touch on this one a little bit because I did not know about this story, which again, maybe
Mm.
I'm living under a rock. I'm not quite sure after, but I'm going to start reading more. That's it. That's the sentence.
Okay, great, cool.
I'm going to start reading more, but I did not hear about this, but very upsetting and
Yeah.
also very scary that someone that was considered a living saint at the time.
Hmm.
So I would love for you to kind of take people through. I know we can't
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
work note version.
No, sure. Well, basically, Jean Vanier is he was famous for founding L'Arche, which is this great community set of communities around the world, houses where people with developmental disabilities and people without developmental disabilities live side by side. So it's a really beautiful mission. If you've ever been to a L'Arche house, like the joy is overwhelming. Like it's alongside the frustrations too, certainly, but this is a place where, people who have often not been able to live with dignity, are able to live that way and be respected and contribute to the home. And, if they're able to work, they're working for the benefit of the community. It's a gorgeous thing. And when you think about, I mean, there's this like founding myth of L'Arche, but it's based in, the truth that the institutions that were available for people with those kinds of disabilities were horrifying back
Mm,
when L'Arche was started. And so it really
right.
offered this compassionate alternative. But Jean Vanier, the founder, whose whole story was, oh, I went to one of these institutions and I saw how terribly they were treated, and I decided to take people into my own home. It turns out after his death, we found out it was a lot more complicated than that. And that
Mm,
actually, so shortly after his death, Vanier was accused of sexual abuse by, I think, 9 non-disabled women who
mm,
had lived with him in large communities, who said that basically he had abused this space of spiritual direction and abused his kind of leading relationship with them
mm,
to coerce them into different sex acts. And then L'Arche, I think, handled this very admirably. They engaged a third party investigator, and they found out that actually the priest that Vanier had famously visited this institution with when he had this big life changing moment, he was himself a serial sexual and spiritual abuser. And Vanier fully subscribed to his ideas. And after the Vatican quashed this guy and his community that he had started, Vanier started L'Arche in part as a cover to get that group back together
mm,
and to continue indoctrinating people in some of these like bizarre spiritual, sexual, abusive practices.
Yeah.
Um, Now, I am really impressed and touched that there's this one line in the third party report that I always go back to where they say basically, too many good people joined too fast, attracted by the mission, that the sex cult part of it was not able to take off in the way that Vanier had imagined, and eventually, it kind of shrunk out. Um, but yeah, so the big revelation here was that this man who had been lauded as a living saint and who, like, I personally looked up to so much when he was alive, and I watched his funeral and everything, and I cried on the subway watching it. Um, that he was then revealed to have been kind of this moral monster or to have
Yeah.
done these horrible things. It was, yeah, deeply upsetting, and I think especially challenging for people who were in the L'Arche community, which was never me, but I had some good friends who volunteered through it and who left the organization because of this or in anticipation of it coming out. Um, I think a lot of people that I talked to had to wrestle with like separating out the good, like the
Mm,
great good that Vanier and his story and this organization had done in their lives,
right.
and the evil that had happened, right? It doesn't fit into these black and white categories that we have. Jean
Mm,
Vanier taught me some really powerful and good spiritual lessons, and at the same time did horrible things. And
right.
so the question is like, do you have to like expunge his whole influence from your brain, from your heart? That's not possible to do either.
Mhm.
So, yeah, anyway, that's kind of what I was getting at earlier when I was talking about like I find it more helpful to talk about actions as good or evil than people, because all of us have both in us, and some
Right.
people to a very big extent.
Right. And just the importance of recognizing both of those things can be true. Like your
Mm-hmm.
frustration as well as what you've been able to take away, like making space for both of those. Something
Mm-hmm.
I imagine you've gotten pretty good at.
Yeah, yeah. I was recently talking to a friend of mine who also has a podcast about kind of spiritual things, and he is a psychologist and a therapist and specializes in the area of spiritual abuse.
Oh, wow.
And he was telling me, he was like, it's a sign psychologically of psychological maturity when you can hold two different truths at once, right? When you can hold two things that feel conflicting or feel contradictory and
Right.
recognize that they're both true at the same time. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think that's been a big part of my whole like, I don't know, I don't even know if it's spiritual journey, but like journey of understanding people more complexly, right? Or of just how I view the world is,
Yeah.
yeah, having to realize that we all have it all in us.
Yeah. Well, and I just that story, my favorite part was still that there were too many good people that
Oh,
joined
so
it.
good. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
amazing.
Because
That's
when you
amazing.
look at that community now, like that's exactly who it's full of, is people who just
Yeah.
have the biggest hearts. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it also taught me something about like, yeah, like you just said before, not putting people on a pedestal,
Right.
because I was very uncritical of
Mm,
Vanier. I was very laudatory about him
mm,
throughout all my coverage of him whenever he came up. And that was an uncontroversial place to stand. So I never got any crap for it.
right.
And then when I looked back, it was like, oh, you know what? Like, I did know that his spiritual mentor had been, like, had some allegations against him.
Mm,
Why didn't I ever look into that? Why didn't
yeah.
I check that
Right.
out? And so, yeah, these days I think I'm a lot more careful about
Yeah.
my reporting too. And I think that's a good lesson for a journalist, even if it makes you seem maybe a little more jaded.
Right. Well, jaded, but also just like that's really like actually I think that's just really humble to be able to be like, actually, no, like this was a really humbling experience.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure.
I've
Yeah.
I've been watching a lot of I don't know about this, but I've been watching a lot of documentaries about cults.
Oh, for
Um,
sure. Let's go there. Yeah.
let's go. This is more just a side tangent, but You know, it's funny whenever I watch these films, a lot of times they'll be coming up at work or with friends and people are like, "Can you believe this? Can you believe they did this and then they got convinced to do this?" And it's like, "You know what? Actually, I can.
Hmm.
I can believe that because I've been in positions with people who I really do admire
Hmm.
and who I really do think are speaking such truth. And so, no, I've never paid them $50,000. I haven't
Right.
gotten that far down the rabbit hole, but it's like who to say that I wouldn't. I mean,
Hmm.
and that's what I think is important about this. I was even just talking to someone about something like choosing a therapist. And
Mm.
anytime there's like anything with vulnerability, you really do have to be careful and
It's so risky. Yeah.
yeah,
It's
it
really
is.
it's difficult, and it's really worth like working really hard to find the right person.
Right.
And it's such a grueling process too. Like nobody wants
Hmm.
to do therapy intake 20 times in a row,
Right.
you know? But
Yeah.
yeah, I do think it's true. Like I've had bad therapists and I've got a good one
Right.
now, but
Right.
oh my God.
It,
Yeah.
it can make it well make or break a lot of things, but it just reminds me of when I had interviewed the previous priest about the just sex abuse scandals
Hmm.
and him just saying like he almost thought like should I leave the priesthood because he was so disappointed and he said we're just held to a higher standard because of the level of trust that we are given, and it's
Yeah.
true, it's really
Hmm.
true.
Yeah. I mean, people always cite that abuse is no more common in the church than it is anywhere else. But
Yeah.
the big difference is that these are folks who you believe have some kind of special link to God, right? Like
Yeah.
for us in the Catholic Church, like these are the only people who can affect the sacraments. Well, besides marriage, which we do ourselves.
Right.
But that theological tangent. Um,
Right.
but yeah, like yeah, it's you're held to a higher standard because you should be, you know?
Right. Yeah.
It's yeah, but it's hard, and it's definitely I think a real source of pain for a lot of priests, and I think at the same time like a lot of them totally get what they're walking into now, you know?
Yeah.
I mean,
True.
the the few Jesuits like that the era of Jesuits that I grew up with, a lot of those guys were entering the priesthood right around 2002. Some of them
Mm.
were in their first year of Jesuit formation, like my editor in chief, um, right when those allegations came out. So they all had to, or those revelations came out. They all had to figure out, is this what I want to do with my life? Like the questions I was
Right.
asking myself about, do I feel okay representing this institution as like a public Catholic? They had to wrestle with even more.
Right.
And and I did a big story, gosh, maybe 2 years ago in the fall about seminaries. And a
Mm.
lot of those guys, too, they come in with much more openness these days to like psychological evaluations and getting therapy and group therapy and all that, um, because they understand that it's important to like really be in a solid place with your mental health, to really have a full, solid understanding of yourself, even the parts of you that, you don't feel comfortable sharing besides with the therapist, because reckoning with those things and having like a fully integrated understanding of yourself are some of the frontline defenses to, these things that spiraled out of control in the clerical sexual abuse crisis. And I think they also understand, even though it hurts a little, it stings a little, is the lack of trust that some people kind of reflexively have toward priests these days. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I've
Right.
I've been really impressed with like the maturity I've seen in some of the young guys and how they approach this.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's something that gives you hope, right? That's
Yeah, for sure.
certainly part of it. Okay, I want to kind of pivoting from church, pivoting from priest. I want to talk about the role of lay people in the church. It
There
seems
we
to be
go.
something
Okay.
that you're pretty passionate
I
about.
am. This is one of
Tell
my
me
pet
about it.
subjects.
Yeah, let's
I
hear it.
just Okay, I mean, this is something that the Vatican II articulated so well and like really changed our
Mm.
ecclesiology, our understanding of the church. But, lay people are the vast majority of the church. We are the ones who are out in the world even more so than, whatever, if you're looking from this traditional model of like priests as having been withdrawn from the world, which is not necessarily true in all cases, right? There's plenty of instances throughout history of priests being out in the streets, nuns being out in the streets, etc. But the vast majority of Catholics that a person will meet are lay people. And so Vatican II articulated in a really decisive way that we are the protagonists of evangelization. It's up to us to be that message of the resurrection, that message of the love of God. All of
Mhm.
that is up to us to show to regular people in our daily lives. You
Right.
don't need to be, off in a cloistered monastery to be close to God. God is also right here with you in the street, in the subway, in your interactions with work. Um, and so yeah, this is something that I'm really passionate about because I feel called to it as a layperson.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and this is as somebody who very seriously discerned becoming a nun, right?
Right.
I I looked into it, I did the convent visits, the whole deal, and so it became clear to me that like my vocation isn't just non-nun, right? My vocation is lay
None. None.
person being a missionary in the world. And
Yeah.
in my specific case, being somebody who is helping the church grapple with ugly truths about itself sometimes, and also who's communicating some of the amazing things the church does,
Right.
to people who are not super plugged into the Vatican or whatever. So yeah, I'm really passionate about it because I think it's like my life calling.
Yeah.
But also I just if I can plug for a second, Madeleine Delbrel, the writer who I mentioned, having those quotes from that were sticking with me while I was at the Holy Sepulchre, she is also the person who I get some of these images from because back in the 30s, way before Vatican II, because we have to remember Vatican II ideas didn't come from nowhere, right?
Right.
Um, there was a whole liturgical movement, for example. They didn't just like get together and be like, let's say mass in the vernacular. Uh, some people think that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, so anyway, Madeleine Delbrel back in the 30s is writing about the missionary role of lay people. And she has this
Mhm.
incredible, like, poem, litany, whatever you want to call it, where she's writing about, it's called Missionaries Without Boats. And she talks about exactly what I was saying before, where, you know, you don't have to go into a cloister and escape from the world to be the presence of God in the world, the presence of God to other people. And so she
Right.
goes through this whole prayer where she says, a missionary, a traditional missionary, like you think of in your imagination, stands at the top of like a sand dune looking out across all the unbaptized lands and whatever. And she's like, but we, the ordinary people of the streets, that's the name of her book, we, the ordinary people of the streets, stand at the top of a crowded subway staircase at rush hour. And we look out across all of the heads and hats and hair, everybody down below us, and we see people who need to be loved.
Wow.
And then she goes through this whole prayer of her like commute home. She talks
Mhm.
about, you know, okay, God, let me be your mouth to say to this person, here, take my subway seat. God, let me be your hands to hold the door for someone. God, let me be whatever, it's this idea God has no face in the world but yours. God has no hands in the world but yours, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I just love it so much. And I read that, way back in college, I guess. And then when I was living in New York, which was very much like that kind of pressing in environment all the time, right? I revisited it and it was like just it was a city spirituality that really spoke to how I was feeling at that time and the reality I was in.
Yeah. Well, I just love your passion for it because I've had a lot of people in my friend groups and whatnot who have gone through discernment and a lot of times sometimes it seems like leaving the discernment, choosing not to go into religious life, they could feel like a disappointment, like a lesser than. Like,
Hmm.
oh, I wasn't willing to give my life to God, or I like God was calling me to something higher. Like it
Yeah,
is. It's kind of like you hear things and you're like, well, that's not really the case. So I'm
I
so
know. It
glad
makes
that
me sad. Yeah.
yeah, that you say that.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think some of that belief is rooted in like a very pre-Vatican II ecclesiology where like you would have the Baltimore Catechism, right? This is like this little book that people in past generations had to like memorize questions and answers from. But there's
Yeah.
literally like a diagram in there of like the hierarchy of callings. And that's
Mm,
just not the way that we talk about these things anymore.
yeah.
Um, can I tell you the reality of what discerning away from religious life looked like for me?
I would love to hear it.
So I was on my last convent visit, right?
Mm,
And I was praying with the nuns and I was having like just such a great time. We had had this like come and see moment and then we had dinner together and they were so happy and I was like, gosh, I could be so happy here.
mm,
And but there's kind of a principle in discernment where you don't want to hold on to anything too tightly, right? So it's like even if you feel like you have something, even if you feel like you're being given something, you kind of hold it with an open hand.
mm,
So I was feeling like, okay, I think this could be where I'm meant to be. So I went into prayer with the sisters to do night prayer. It was the last thing on the agenda for the night. And I brought to prayer, I was like, okay, God, like, is this where you want me to be? Because God and I had talked before that visit about how this is going to be my last one. And
yeah.
if this wasn't the place, then I wasn't meant to be a nun. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
God, like here's the experience I've had. What's like what's the deal? What's the answer?
Yeah.
Because yeah, spiritual directors have often told me that you should put a deadline on your discernment. Otherwise it
Mm,
can go on forever.
wow.
So yeah, feeling totally at peace. I just kind of quieted myself and brought this, and God was like, no, like
Mm,
no, this isn't where I want you. It's like, okay. So I felt really, really at peace. I pull out of the parking lot that night, like,
yeah.
yeah, again, feeling all this peace. And then as soon as I get out of the nun's like gate onto the road, all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, so wait, what am I supposed to do? Because I thought of myself, I thought my whole life that I would become a nun. And
Yeah.
so I had never imagined another reality for myself. So all of
Right.
a sudden, like I was like, what? Wait, what am I supposed to do? And before I could get too deep into the panic spiral, very clearly in my head, I just heard, you're gonna marry Simon. And I was like, what?
What?
Like my friend that I kind of am not ready to admit that I have a crush on? Like, hold on. And also I was about to like go off to Switzerland for a study abroad and he had just gone off to grad school in Canada. Like, how is this gonna
Right.
work?
Yeah.
And and yeah, like I didn't even realize that I had had feelings for him at that point. Well, guess what? I go off to Switzerland. We start Skyping. I realize like, oh my
Oh,
God, he's a person I can like be silent with, and
yeah.
like we're really connected. Whatever. Anyway, flash forward to today. We're married. We have a kid. Like it all worked out.
That's
But yeah, so
beautiful.
it was weird how quickly that came to me, but I'm glad that I didn't get the time to kind of sit in that fear of, oh my gosh,
Right.
what's next? Yeah.
Right.
Which
No,
was
that
real
is.
grace, total great. I did nothing to to like earn this, right? This is just a
No, that is a
pouring
grace.
out.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. I also love the part of that story that you started Skyping. I haven't heard that word in a
I
while.
know, right? They really blew the lead on Zoom, man. They
I
had like a
know.
10-year lead and
What
just
happened?
fumbled it.
Such a bummer for Skype. Such a bummer. Well, that's
Sorry,
beautiful.
Skype.
That's yeah. And now, and it is cool. And now here you are, inspiring lay people. Can you tell me a little? This is like such another big question. Okay,
Sure.
first of all, I'm not going to dive into it. People can read it in the book, but the chapter about saints blew my mind. I had no
Oh
idea that
yeah.
that happened. I had no idea the ins and outs. You really go through what it takes to become a saint. It actually takes way more money that probably anyone thinks.
Yeah, it's like maybe not the process to become a saint, but to be canonized one.
Right, canonized. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you just be a good
The
person and you might
canonization
become one.
process is rough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
crazy. Can you give a little reasoning about why you love Dorothy Day?
Oh my
Why she
gosh, that's a
inspires
huge
you?
question.
I know it's a huge
Why
question,
she
but
inspires me?
yeah, why
Um,
she inspires you.
is,
For those
is
that
that the
don't know
same or
Dorothy
is
Day.
that the same or different from the question of why she should be a saint?
Um,
Okay, I'll
I
just
don't
keep
know.
it real introductory.
Okay.
Dorothy Day, yeah, I mean, I think the primary thing jumping off of what we were just talking about is that she was a lay woman who lived the gospel radically, so she didn't grow up particularly religious, but she became a Catholic in adulthood, and she always had like a very strong social justice sense, right? She always, even from the time she was a little girl, was like looking out for the people who were on the margins of society, the poor. She was really touched as a kid after the San Francisco earthquake, which happened when she was little, at seeing just like how impoverished and like, kind of left with nothing people were. And then also was moved by the charity that so many religious communities especially showed towards those folks. But she moves to New York and, she has this whole kind of bohemian life and it's very interesting. She never loses this like justice sense either. But as she moves into adulthood, as she has a daughter and starts thinking about the bigger things in life, uh, she decides that she wants to be part of this Catholic church that she doesn't know much about, but
Mm.
she's kind of puzzled by because it's the church where all of these like poor immigrants in New York City flock to for 1 hour a week to like hear a guy pray quietly in Latin. And she's like, what is this about?
Yeah.
And and yeah, so she digs into it and she starts studying the Gospels and she starts studying the catechism with a nun who helped her out. And eventually she feels this really strong call to have her daughter baptized, to be baptized herself. And then because it was this kind of like mid-century situation where Catholics were not allowed to be married to non-Catholics, and her common law husband was not going to convert to Catholicism. He was very skeptical of religion. She had to leave him. And so she leaves him to go start houses of hospitality in New York,
Wow.
which are the Catholic worker movement now. Um, there's kind of a whole philosophy there, but yeah, for our intensive purposes, basically they were houses that welcomed kind of the poor and the needy. They had a soup kitchen, but they also allowed people to live there for free
Wow.
alongside some of the Catholic workers who really gave up everything. So, they didn't have bank accounts or anything like that. Um, yeah, so just radical gospel hospitality. And then there's also a whole social justice element of it. She was very anti-war, which kind of gained her a lot of support at certain points and lost her a lot of support at certain points when it was seen as unpatriotic. Yeah, so anyway, I'm inspired by her because because she had the guts to live a lay vocation to the extreme, she was called to be a mother, but it didn't stop there. She was called to be a journalist, right? But it didn't stop there. She started her own newspaper. She wrote prolifically. I know because I was part of transcribing everything she ever wrote for the
Right.
canonization cause. Um, yeah,
Amazing.
so there's so many things about her that resonate with me, but then also challenge me,
Yeah.
like, am I acting like the gospel is true in the way that
Mm.
Dorothy Day did?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, it's
Love her.
so interesting. It's so cool to hear like even how you're involved in that whole process. Do you have any books about Dorothy Day that you would recommend?
Ooh, starting with her is always great. So
Yeah, or what?
The
Okay.
Long Loneliness is her big autobiography.
That's the big one.
Yeah, some people will say that it's a little bit sanitized. And then, uh, there's a really excellent, like combined biography of Dorothy Day, Walker Percy, Thomas Merton, and Flannery O'Connor. And it's called The Life You Save May Be Your Own by Paul Ely. And it is a fantastic book. It's huge. It's several hundred pages, but it's like, for me as like a Catholic nerd, a page turner.
Yeah.
And I think
Okay.
about stuff from that book all the time. Yeah,
Yeah.
highly
All right.
recommend.
Well, I've been wanting to learn more about her. And so when I was reading this, I was like, oh, well, she seems like a perfect person to ask
There you
about
go.
Dorothy
Yeah,
Day.
yeah.
That's great. And I told you at the beginning of this episode that I'm going to start reading.
I'm just gonna read more.
Yeah. Just gonna read
You
more.
know, that's like an incredible early January sentence.
Yes, yes, it
I am
is.
going to read more.
This is very timely. Okay, Colleen, I want to land the plane here with a great big little bow on it all, which is what I think is so cool about what you do is you really see really hard stuff, kind of the worst of the worst, but you keep coming back to the faith. And you're very open that it's not always easy, but you do. And we talked about the tomb and hope. Is there something that you could say to really summarize why you still choose to be Catholic?
Lately, when people ask me this, because they ask me this a lot because of the book, I think immediately about this Stephen Colbert quote, who, is also like a person who has to talk about ugly things every day with humor though, and stays very Catholic.
Yeah.
But he says, you can't take the Catholicism out of me in the same way that you can't take the marble out of a statue,
Mm.
right? Like it is who I am, it is so deeply part of me. I remember talking to my therapist as I was working on the book and kind of having to talk about how to talk about the book because it's one thing to write it. I
Oh,
write
yeah.
very easily. It's a whole different thing to like then have to do all these speaking events and
Right.
whatever and like that's talking about something it's very personal.
Right.
Um but as we were preparing that it kind of became clear to me like that I never actually had a crisis of faith.
Mm.
I had crises of community. I had crises of belonging. I had crises of, can I be part of this institution? Crises about people disappointing me. But like God, I never actually lost the faith in, which is a real gift, like
Yeah.
not everybody gets that. Madeline Delbrel, again, always said that, faith is not a gift you can give someone, right? You can really want to, and you can give them all the things that go around it. But like in the end, it's just God and the person that can work out that relationship between them. Um, yeah, so I mean that raises hard questions then too about like why is it harder for some people than others? I don't know. The best I can say is that like I just feel lucky that it's not something that has been so hard for me to
Mm.
keep believing in. That like even when I've been really mad at God, it's that I've been mad at God and not like
Right.
mad and not had a person to be mad at, or
Right.
not believe that that person was there. Um, so yeah, it's just so deeply embedded in me. But maybe the more fundamental question or the more relevant one for the book is why do I stay Catholic? Why do
Mm.
I keep coming back to this? And I think it's a mix of some of the things that people always say, like the Eucharist, this feeling of, Lord, to whom else would we go?
Right.
Um, but also I think like the answer to the question is the book.
Mm.
So this wrestling, I think that I outlined pretty early on in the book, the thing about Jacob and the angel, the story of the wrestling is my answer to the question, right?
Mm.
It's that I don't have just one answer to how or why I've stayed Catholic. The answer is that like this is where the wrestling has brought me and that
Yeah.
it's still an ongoing process and it's still an ongoing story.
Mm.
Um, And the goal with the book wasn't to give people a nice answer about here's how you keep your faith or here's how you stay a Catholic,
Right.
right? Which I
Right.
think some people have come to the book thinking, or they've like bought it for other people as like a here's how you stay Catholic, having
Right.
not read
Yeah.
it.
I
And
heard you were wounded
yeah,
by
like
the
and
church.
I it's not a book of answers. It's a book
Yeah.
of stories. And I think that the real grace is that sharing our stories with each other and being honest with them
Right.
is it helps us feel less alone and it helps us understand that like, yeah, we're not by ourselves wrestling with God and that actually it's okay to do it.
Right.
And that that is also a way that God works in us and works in the world.
Yeah. No, I think that's perfect because it is. It's okay to be frustrated and you've clearly, even throughout your entire story, you were always praying. You were always showing up.
Yeah.
You were always open to God. And so those graces just keep you going. Praise God.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny. Like even in the middle of that awful summer, like I just couldn't not. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Right.
Just couldn't not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Just keep showing up, everyone.
Well,
Showing up. Okay, Colleen. So obviously your book, you could buy the book, Struck Down, Not Destroyed, wherever books are sold. Um,
there's ebook, audiobook,
oh,
whatever you
perfect.
like.
Whatever you like, your preference. Your podcast, Inside the Vatican.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
wherever you get podcasts,
Wherever you get
YouTube.
podcasts.
Uh it comes out every
Anything
week.
else? Anything else that people need to know about?
I got nothing else to plug. I write for America Magazine. You can find my writing there.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's it.
And you're going to be writing about our guy, Pope Leo.
I am. I am.
Full send.
Yeah, writing about him currently from the US, but we'll be writing about him from Rome full time starting in the summer.
What do you think so far? Have you been enjoying what his stuff?
Am I pro Pope Leo?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, he has really impressed me. Obviously, he's a very different person from Pope Francis, but I think
Right.
that, all of the like essential things that Francis started, he is continuing. I think that he's known for this like consensus building style, so I have a lot of faith that he can make some progress in helping us overcome a lot of the divisions in the church. And, you know, in the same way that Pope Francis was kind of the Pope of the poor, I think Leo has staked out that he's going to be the Pope of peace. And I think that with everything going on in the world, geopolitically especially, that is going to be so, so important. And this is likely to be a long papacy. So I am hoping that that message of peace like actually gets through to people and continues for, gosh, like 20 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No kidding. Praise God. I was just excited. I love all the videos online of like people handing him hot dogs or baseball bats.
Bringing whole deep dish pizzas.
Yeah, I can't help but just like be like, this is amazing. This is why the internet was made. Was so that I
Right before I went to the conclave, my neighbor gave me two baseballs on a Sharpie and was like, just in case.
That's so funny. That's so funny. I
I
mean,
did not get them signed.
yeah, no, I would be tempted to do the same though in your neighbor's defense. Well, Colleen, this was a joy. Best of
Thanks,
luck with
Mary.
your move, and we're going to be keeping tabs on you and reading up because this is really beautiful work that you're doing, so we really appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Yay!